Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of the Sumerian civilization, spanning from their earliest days to the end of the early dynastic period. Now, before we delve into the specifics, let's address something crucial. The Sumerians weren't alone in shaping history. While they played a significant role, it's essential to recognize the contributions of other cultures as well. When it comes to pinpointing exact dates in ancient history, it can be a bit tricky. We rely on various sources like Assyrian and Babylonian king lists, dated tablets, and annual officials' records. But even with all that, there's still some uncertainty, especially for the period before 1450 BCE. Speaking of dates, there's quite a debate about when exactly the first dynasty of Babylon ended. Some say around 1594 BCE. Others argue for 1530 BCE, and some even propose 1730 BCE. For simplicity's sake, let's stick with the middle chronology, which places it around 1594 BCE. Now, let's zoom in on life in ancient Sumerian cities like Uruk. Picture this: bustling temples, residential areas, and a thriving economy based on agriculture, stock breeding, fishing, and date palm cultivation. But what really sets them apart is their specialization. They had sculptors, seal engravers, smiths, carpenters, and more, each honing their craft to perfection. But here's where it gets interesting. Part of the population received rations from a central distribution point. This meant they didn't have to worry about putting food on the table themselves. A revolutionary concept, don't you think? And let's not forget about trade. These cities were hubs of commerce, connecting with distant lands and exchanging goods, ideas, and culture. Now, let's talk about something truly fascinating: the birth of writing. Imagine this. The earliest tablets discovered contained not elaborate stories or grand declarations, but simple figures and measurements. These were tools for an ever-expanding administration, helping them keep track of everything from goods to personal names. But decoding these ancient tablets isn't easy. The writing style was incredibly concise, assuming the reader knew the context. Plus, many of the early signs have been lost to time, making interpretation a challenge. Now, let's shift our focus to something equally intriguing: the social structure and governance of these ancient cities. You see, the Sumerians had their own unique titles for rulers. The word lugal, meaning big person, was used to refer to the ruler, while in Uruk they were known as en. But here's where it gets really interesting. The title en wasn't just for rulers, it also had a religious significance. You'll find it in epic stories and even in personal names, highlighting its importance in Sumerian society. Now, let's address a burning question. Did these rulers appear in ancient artwork? Some speculate that figures like a man tending sheep or aiming an arrow at a lion might represent the ruler or a priest fulfilling administrative duties. But, truth be told, it's all speculation. We can't say for certain whether these depictions truly represent the rulers or not. Now, let's talk about the Sumerian king list, a fascinating piece of literature dating back to old Babylonian times. This list traces the lineage of kingship in Mesopotamia, from mythical times to the end of the first dynasty of Ishin. According to this list, kingship was held by one city at a time, leading to a succession of dynasties across different cities. But here's where it gets intriguing. While the king list is a valuable tool for understanding Mesopotamian history, it's not without its flaws. For instance, it exaggerates the lengths of reigns, with some rulers supposedly reigning for hundreds or even thousands of years. And, interestingly, it overlooks significant dynasties like the first dynasty of Lagash, and fails to acknowledge the early prominence of Uruk. Now, let's shift our focus to a darker aspect of ancient Mesopotamia: violence. Cylinder seals from the Uruk period depict scenes of brutality, with captives being beaten or maltreated by standing figures. These likely represent the grim reality of warfare and the treatment of prisoners of war. While we don't have all the details, this provides us with our first glimpse into the wars that would become a defining feature of Mesopotamian history. And speaking of higher powers, let's touch on religion. The earliest evidence we have comes in the form of symbols that later became cuneiform signs for gods' names. For example, the gatepost with streamers represents Inanna, the goddess of love and war, while the ringed post symbolizes the moon god Nana. These symbols offer insight into the religious practices of ancient Mesopotamians, reflecting their different economic activities and ways of life. Now, when we talk about divine names and place names in Mesopotamia, we encounter a mix of both Sumerian and non-Sumerian languages. But here's the catch. Since we only know the pronunciation of these names from 2000 BCE onwards, deciphering their linguistic origins isn't straightforward. Some names have even been reinterpreted in Sumerian through popular etymology. But let's not overlook the significance of the Sumerian components, which are related to the Hurrian language. These elements likely played a more substantial role than previously thought, adding layers of complexity to Mesopotamian culture. Now, let's shift our focus to the Semitic languages, which have a long history in Mesopotamia. Whether Semitic-speaking people joined city civilization in the 4th or 3rd millennium BCE remains a mystery. Over the millennia, Semitic tribes like the Amorites and Arameans transitioned from nomadic to settled lifestyles, shaping the cultural landscape of the region. But here's a burning question. How did writing spread in Mesopotamia, and who adopted it first? Well, evidence from sites like Kish in northern Babylonia suggests that intellectual exchanges between northern and southern regions facilitated the spread of writing. And get this, cuneiform, the script used for writing, wasn't exclusively for Sumerian. Non-Sumerian languages were also written using cuneiform as early as the 27th century BCE. Now, let's talk about Enmebargese, the earliest historical figure we can pin down in Mesopotamian history. As king of Kish around 2700 BCE, Enmebargese left his mark through authentic inscriptions found on vase fragments, offering us a glimpse into the political landscape of the time. During Enmebargese's reign, we see a shift in Mesopotamian society. The once flourishing high culture of Uruk level 4 began to decline, marked by changes in artistic styles and architectural traditions. Temples were abandoned, and new structures like the Aina ziggurat emerged, signaling a shift in religious practices and societal norms. In the centuries following the decline of Uruk level 4 and Enmebargese's rule, southern Mesopotamia saw the rise of numerous city-states, each with its own temple at the heart of its governance. Enmebargese's legacy is also immortalized in Sumerian literature, with tales like Gilgamesh and Aga of Kish recounting the siege of Uruk by Aga, his son. But here's where it gets intriguing. The legendary figure of Gilgamesh, celebrated in Mesopotamian literature, raises questions about the intersection of myth and history. While Gilgamesh is revered as a heroic figure, the extent of his historical existence remains debated among scholars. Stories of Gilgamesh's exploits may have been embellished over time, blurring the line between fact and fiction. However, one thing is clear. Armed conflicts between Mesopotamian cities like Uruk and Kish were not uncommon during this tumultuous period. With rival forces vying for power, clashes and territorial disputes were a constant feature of Mesopotamian politics. Now, let's zoom in on Kish, a pivotal player in the unfolding drama of Mesopotamian politics. From around 2500 BCE, rulers from southern Babylonian cities like Ur and Lagash often claimed the title of King of Kish to assert their authority over northern Babylonia. But contrary to some accounts portraying Kish as an empire, it likely served as a symbolic representation of the north, akin to what the land of Akkad later represented. Despite the wealth of archaeological findings from the 27th and 26th centuries BCE, piecing together a coherent historical narrative remains a challenge. Written documents offer invaluable insights, but even they contain as many mysteries as they do answers. Take, for instance, the royal tombs of Ur, a breathtaking discovery showcasing the grandeur and rituals of ancient Mesopotamian society. But without written records to provide context, these findings leave us with more questions than answers. Fortunately, from around 2520 BCE onwards, historical accounts begin to take shape, thanks to records from the city-state of Lagash and its capital, Uruk. These texts shed light on the power struggles and territorial disputes between Lagash and its rival, Umma. One notable conflict is immortalized in the Stele of Vultures, which recounts how Lagash's ruler, Enadum, forced Umma to respect their territorial boundaries through a divine oath. These battles, marked by shifting alliances and changing fortunes, mirrored the geopolitical landscape of later times. Interestingly, the rulers of Lagash preferred the title of Ensi, meaning city ruler or prince, over king. This suggests a localized hierarchy that would later evolve under the kings of Akkad. Alright, time to delve deeper into the inner workings of ancient Mesopotamian city-states, particularly Lagash. These territorial states weren't just about ruling a city and its surroundings. Aggressive leaders expanded their territories, incorporating not only the capital city of Uruk and Lagash itself, but also smaller settlements and even a seaport called Gaba. But don't let your imagination run wild with thoughts of vast, well-organized empires. These territorial states were likely limited in size, despite some rulers' claims stretching from the limits of Ningirsu to the sea, a distance of up to 125 miles. For a long time, scholars viewed Sumerian city-states through the lens of the temple city concept. This idea portrayed rulers as representatives of gods, theoretically owning all land. But recent discoveries paint a more complex picture. Archives from the Temple of Baba in Gursu reveal a sophisticated administrative system where economic activities, including agriculture, livestock farming, and trade, were closely tied to the temple. However, these records only offer a glimpse into temple administration, leaving out the private sector, which likely played a significant role. Private land ownership is evident from records of land purchases written in both Sumerian and Akkadian. These documents suggest that while many worked for the temple, there was a private sector, possibly consisting of family-owned lands. The demographic makeup of Sumerian cities remains a mystery, though rulers could mobilize the populace for public works like building monuments or canals. Slavery existed, primarily involving female slaves employed in various industries. We also see early signs of social reform. Intimina of Lagash, for instance, boasted of restoring sons to their mothers and mitigating social injustices through decrees. Uruk reforms aimed to alleviate tensions between the palace and clergy, possibly reallocating lands to the temples. These insights, gleaned from the archives of Gursu, offer a glimpse into pre-Sargonic Mesopotamia. But caution is needed in making generalizations, as new discoveries may reveal fresh perspectives. As we approach the rise of the Akkadian Empire, Mesopotamian influence extends across the region, from Mari to Ebla, and even reaching Iran and the Mediterranean. But it's the Akkadians who will soon unite this diverse territory into a larger state, changing the course of history.